My name is Benny Liu. I'm the founder and CEO of NextShark.com. We're the largest online publication targeting Asian Americans. Essentially, NextShark actually started off as an online publication targeting young entrepreneurs. So at the time, I actually used to be an online poker player. And in the poker world, a poker shark is somebody that kind of understands what's going on into the table. He's probably like a better player than most of the players at the table, and so that's kind of where the shark comes from. Okay. And then next obviously signifies kind of the next generation, of entrepreneurs or of stars that are coming up. And when we transitioned more into when we pivoted into an Asian American and Asian audience, we just kind of kept the name. We noticed that we were getting a lot of engagement whenever we showcase anything like Asian-centric, any sort of content that was Asian-centric. So this was obviously anything involving Asian Americans, Asian American business people, entrepreneurs, or tastemakers. And we also noticed the same sort of high engagement when we covered news that was happening in Asia as well. And so a lot of people might ask the question where, okay, well, the Asian American demographic is quite different from the Asian market. And that's true in a sense. And truth be told, most of our audience are Asian Americans, at least over 60% of our traffic still comes from the US. But for the most part, we also think that with the amount of globalization that's been happening, and if you look at the upbringing of many Asian Americans, especially in the coastal cities, and especially how I grew up, we consumed a lot of content in Asia growing up. Me as a Chinese American, I watched a lot of Chinese movies. I consumed a lot of Asian pop culture, especially in high school. I was a really big fan of K-pop, J-pop, and whatnot. And so my argument to that is, yeah, there are differences, and the experience of the Asian American and Asians can be completely different. But in terms of how the content that we consume and the type of culture that influences us, a lot of things happening in Asia really do resonate with people in Asia, right?
Okay.
So.
Yeah, so obviously Asian American is a very diverse community, let alone global Asians.
Yeah.
So how would you describe your target audience?
So for the most part, most of our audience comes from mobile devices. And so within that, we have a little bit of a younger audience. So 18 to 34 is our top audience. Mm-hmm. And we also have, I would say, mostly females. So I think it's around 60-40 females at the moment. And for the most part, most of our audience exists on social media. And so most of the engagement happens on our Instagram, our Facebook, our Twitter, and our YouTube channel.
Okay. And what do they care about most, your target audience?
They care about a lot of things, but I would say if I had to name a top three, I would say the top three is probably, number one would be food. A lot of the times when you look at how Asian food is written, especially in mainstream media, there's been a lot of controversies lately because a lot of the times they don't necessarily, let's say you're talking about Asian food or Korean food, a lot of the times they don't necessarily speak to a person of Korean descent or of Asian descent whose ancestors kind of came up with that type of food. And so for us, food is a big deal for us, and people love looking at great food, and they love reading about the history of certain cool foods that's happening, whether it's in Asian America or whether it's food innovations in Asia. To give you an example, I went back to Taiwan recently, and I tried this bowl of $300 beef noodle soup, for one bowl, and so. Thank you. Yeah. So that was one of our top articles for that month, and so they're very interested in travel and figuring that out. And the second thing is that's been kind of a surprise for me is crimes against Asian Americans. So as I'm sure a lot of us knows, a lot of times crimes against Asians and crimes against Asian Americans are one of the most underreported incidences. And so for us, when we kind of aggregate and report on these sort of news that happens in our communities, a lot of these people really appreciate it because they can see what's going on, and they share it with their friends and family to kind of inform them of what's going on in local communities and whatnot. A third thing that's also really good too that they really like is whenever we feature fashion, new age fashion. We feature a new sort of trendy fashion styles in Asia that's carrying over into Asian America. Lifestyle content does extremely well for us too, travel content. So overall, it's a really broad spectrum, but for the most part, I think that most people read our site because we have a lot of relatable content. We have a large Asian following too in Asia. And in Asia, even though like we categorize each and every one of us as Asians in this sense, but the truth is we're not just one whole big thing that represents each other as a whole. Like, if we're speaking about Asians, there's so many different countries, so many different cultures and values, and that differ, and it's really hard to kind of encompass everything onto one page. So we kind of wanted to, showcase different types of, Asian continents. So if they're interested in a specific thing, let's say I'm Chinese American, but I'm interested in also reading about, what's going on in my motherland, they click on, let's say, our Chinese tab, and they'll have a whole news feed of everything. But the ones that you see on top, those are just like our top functioning, our top topics so far. But we have categories for India, for Sri Lanka, and a lot of Southeast and East Asian countries as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's a lot of areas for you to.
It's a lot to cover, and it's a challenge.
So how do you identify top trends going on in all these places?
I mean, we just look at the numbers, really. I mean, we obviously, for me, I come from a marketing background, and I really understand. I can look at what types of art content and trends are going on in the industry, especially in mainstream, and I can really identify whether we can embed an Asian angle, to it, or something that relates to our audience. So for me, so that's kind of how I find content to produce and content to write, or or for video or what have you. But for the most part. We simply just identify it based on, whenever we release an article, how did it do engagement-wise? Are people like speaking about it? Are people sharing it on social media? So we're really, for me, like, looking at data is like a drug to me. Like, I'm always on my live analytics on my phone all the time, and I'm always seeing, hey, which articles are doing well? Which ones should we really like, dive in on?
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, great. So why should marketers invest in advertisements in NextShark?
I mean, we're the largest site targeting Asian Americans, and so I think that, I know that a Newsom report recently came out that Asian American buying power has been increasing tremendously. I think 257% in the last decade, right? So I think that there's a lot of opportunities there, and I also think that such a large audience is just so untapped right now. And I think that what I see with a lot of companies when targeting Asians, I see that it seems like a lot of the budget is still going towards more traditional media, which it's great because it targets an older generation. But if you want to really tap into the growing next generation of Asian Americans, that's going to have a lot of influence in the market towards the future, then they need to look into investing in platforms like NextShark and other influencers that are focused on Asian Americans. There's many of us.